The smoke from burning olive groves blotted out the morning sun as the 10th Legion standards gleamed above the ravaged city in the shadow of the Temple Mount, where weeks earlier Jewish rebels had made their final stand against the might of Rome. The true horror of Roman victory was just beginning. The screams had mostly stopped. The dying were already silent, and the living wished they were not among the rubble and ash Roman centurions moved with methodical precision, not in the chaos of battle, but in the organized efficiency of the aftermath of conquest. They were not searching for hidden weapons or surviving fighters. They were hunting for something far more valuable to the imperial machine of Rome. The wives of defeated warriors, a young woman, clutched her infant daughter as Roman hands dragged her from the underground shelter where the body of her husband still lay. Cooling her name had been Deborah Bat Eleazar, wife of a Jewish rebel, commander, mother of two daughters of a priestly family that had served in the temple for generations. By sunset, she would simply be known as the red-haired one in the slave markets of Caesarea. Her child torn from her arms, her identity systematically erased piece by piece. What Rome did to the wives of defeated warriors was not merely brutal. It was an intricately designed system of human destruction that served as the empire-wide weapon of domination. If you enjoy hidden histories like this, consider subscribing and tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing this community stretch across time and place. The year was 70 CE, and what happened in Jerusalem that day would be repeated across the empire's vast frontiers for centuries. Roman military doctrine did not just permit the systematic exploitation of enemy women. It required it. This was not the random violence of undisciplined soldiers, but a calculated process that transformed human beings into commodities, families into fragments, and entire cultures into footnotes in Rome's triumphal narratives. The fate of defeated warriors' wives reveals the darkest machinery of Roman imperialism, one that operated with such efficiency that it fundamentally altered the demographic and cultural landscape of 3 continents. To understand the true magnitude of this horror, we must return to the morning of April 14th, 70 CE, when General Titus and his 4 legions arrived at Jerusalem's gates. The city was swollen with Passover pilgrims, its population perhaps triple its normal size. The Jewish rebels who had defied Rome's authority for 4 years had gathered their families within the city walls, believing, as it turned out falsely, that their resistance could withstand the empire's fury. What they did not understand was that Rome's greatest weapon was not the ballista or the siege tower, but the systematic transformation of human beings into instruments of imperial policy. The siege that followed would become one of history's most thoroughly documented examples of Roman conquest methodology. Titus did not simply want to defeat the rebels. He wanted to eradicate the very possibility of future resistance by demonstrating what happened to those who defied Rome's methodical nature. Of Roman siege warfare served a dual-purpose: military victory and psychological domination. Every phase of the assault was designed not just to breach walls, but to break spirits, to transform the act of conquest into a lesson that would echo through generations. As the outer wall fell after 15 days of relentless bombardment, Roman forces did not immediately press their advantage. Instead, they paused, allowing the terror within to fester. This was not mercy. It was strategy. Ancient historian Josephus, who witnessed these events firsthand, recorded how Roman soldiers systematically herded surviving populations toward predetermined collection points. The process was chilling in its efficiency. Men of fighting age were separated from women and children. The elderly were dispatched with brutal efficiency, and those who might fetch a price in the slave markets were cataloged and cataloged. The wives of defeated warriors faced a fate carefully calibrated to serve multiple Roman objectives. Young women of childbearing age were identified and separated. They represented not just immediate profit, but long-term demographic transformation. The Roman understanding of conquest extended beyond the battlefield to the very womb of defeated populations by systematically removing the wives and mothers of enemy combatants. Rome was not just profiting from slavery, it was preventing the reproduction of resistant populations while simultaneously seeding Roman society with children who would grow up knowing only servitude. Archaeological evidence from Jerusalem's destruction layer reveals the systematic nature of Roman practices. Female skeletons found in the burned remains of the upper city showed distinctive trauma patterns, deliberate injuries that would have incapacitated but not killed, preserving the victim's value as merchandise. The positioning of these remains suggests organized processing, not random violence. Roman efficiency extended even to human trafficking, with evidence indicating that captives were examined, sorted, and transported according to established protocols that maximize profit while minimizing resistance. Princess Chamra's story, occurring more than 2 centuries earlier in 189 BC, illustrates how these practices had evolved into standard Roman doctrine when Roman soldiers captured this noble woman during Titus Manlius' campaign against the Bricari in Lusitania. They were not simply taking a prisoner, they were acquiring a commodity whose value depended on her remaining intact for market. The centurion who raped her violated not just her person but Roman military protocol, which specified that high-value captives remain unblemished to preserve their market price. Chiamra's subsequent revenge, ordering her followers to kill and behead her assailant, stands as a rare example of justice in a system designed to prevent exactly such resistance. The Roman approach to handling defeated warriors' wives operated on multiple interconnected levels, each serving specific imperial objectives. At the most immediate level, the capture and sale of women provided direct profit for Roman forces. Ancient sources indicate that attractive female slaves could command prices equivalent to several years' pay for a Roman soldier, creating powerful incentives for systematic capture rather than random violence. But the economic motivations extended far beyond individual enrichment. The slave trade served as a crucial mechanism for Roman economic expansion, transforming human beings into liquid capital that could fund further military campaigns. Polybius, one of Rome's most respected military historians, explicitly described how Roman forces practiced what scholars now term conquest rape as a standard element of military operations. His accounts reveal that sexual violence against female captives was not incidental to Roman warfare. It was integral to its serving functions that extended far beyond individual gratification. The systematic nature of these practices emerges clearly from his descriptions of Roman military campaigns, where the handling of female prisoners followed established protocols designed to maximize both immediate profit and long-term domination. The iconography of Roman conquest provides perhaps the most disturbing evidence of how thoroughly these practices were integrated into Roman imperial ideology. Artistic depictions from triumphal monuments show captive women with specific gesture patterns, arms positioned to indicate submission, clothing arranged to suggest sexual availability, facial expressions carefully rendered to convey both terror and resignation. These were not random artistic choices, but deliberate visual propaganda designed to communicate Rome's absolute dominance over defeated populations. A consistent repetition of these motifs across different monuments and time periods suggests standardization at the highest levels of Roman official culture. Roman triumph processions transformed the systematic exploitation of enemy women into public spectacle. When Titus returned to Rome after the destruction of Jerusalem, his triumph included not just the temple's sacred objects, but hundreds of Jewish captives, many of them women, who had been wives of rebel leaders. The specific ways these women were displayed: chains arranged to emphasize their former status, clothing designed to highlight their degradation, positioning that maximize their visibility too. The Roman crowd revealed the triumph's dual purpose, celebrating military victory while demonstrating the complete subjugation of the enemy's social and reproductive structures. The processing of captured women followed established Roman protocols that had been refined over centuries of conquest. Initial sorting occurred immediately after capture, with women divided by age, physical condition, and social status. Those deemed suitable for the slave markets were transported to designated collection points, often journeying hundreds of miles under conditions designed to break resistance while preserving market value. Ancient sources describe how Roman officials maintained detailed records of captured populations, noting not just numbers but specific characteristics that would affect sale prices, evidence of a systematic approach that belies any suggestion of random brutality. The economic infrastructure supporting Roman trafficking in captive women extended throughout the empire. Major cities like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch hosted specialized slave markets where women captured during military campaigns were sold alongside those acquired through other means. But the market for captive women extended beyond simple labor slavery. Roman society developed sophisticated systems for exploiting female captives across multiple economic sectors. Beautiful women might serve as household slaves or concubines, while those with specific skills could be trained for specialized roles in textile production, entertainment, or even education. Archaeological evidence from Roman slave markets reveals the systematic nature of this trade. Excavations at Ostia, Rome's port city, have uncovered holding facilities specifically designed for female captives, with separate areas for women of different ages and conditions. The architecture itself tells a story of calculated efficiency spaces designed to prevent escape, while allowing maximum visibility for potential buyers. Facilities for forced bathing and clothing changes, areas where women's appearances could be enhanced to increase sale prices. These were not temporary holding areas, but permanent infrastructure supporting ongoing human trafficking. The psychological impact of Roman practices extended far beyond individual captives to entire communities. When Roman forces systematically removed the wives and mothers of defeated warriors, they were not just profiting from slavery, they were destabilizing the social structures that might support future resistance. The absence of women of childbearing age created demographic crises that could take generations to resolve, effectively preventing conquered populations from recovering their military strength. This demographic warfare served Roman interests by ensuring that defeated enemies remained demographically and culturally weakened long after the immediate military campaign ended. Ancient accounts describe how Roman officials deliberately publicized their treatment of captive women to maximize psychological impact. When Caesar's forces conquered tribes, the systematic removal of women was not hidden, but displayed, sending clear messages to other potential resistors about the cost of defying Rome. The specific ways Roman forces processed and transported captive women, marching them through occupied territories, displaying them at major settlements, allowing survivors to witness their fate, served as powerful propaganda that often proved more effective than military force in securing Roman dominance. The role of rape in Roman conquest extended beyond individual acts of violence to serve as a systematic tool of cultural transformation. Ancient sources indicate that Roman forces deliberately targeted women who represented cultural or religious leadership within their communities. Priestesses, healers, tribal elders, wives, not just for their individual value, but for their symbolic significance. The systematic sexual violation of these women served to demonstrate Rome's complete domination over not just military forces, but the cultural and religious institutions that held communities together. Roman legal frameworks explicitly supported these practices. Roman law classified captured women as public spoils obtained by soldiers' valor, creating legal categories that denied them any rights or protections. This legal designation remained in effect until captives were formally sold into private slavery, at which point they acquired the limited protections available to slaves under Roman law. The transition from public spoils to private property represented not an improvement in conditions, but a transformation in the nature of exploitation from collective military use to individual ownership. The long-term consequences of Roman trafficking in defeated warriors' wives extended across generations. Children born to captive women grew up knowing only slavery. Their original family identities were systematically erased through processes that prevented them from learning their mother's languages, cultural practices, or family histories. This cultural erasure served Roman interests by creating populations whose loyalty lay exclusively with their Roman masters, effectively reproducing Roman social hierarchies through biological reproduction itself. Archaeological evidence from Roman colonial settlements reveals how thoroughly these practices transformed conquered territories. Excavations at sites throughout the former Roman Empire consistently showed demographic patterns reflecting the systematic removal of indigenous women during the initial phases of conquest, followed by the introduction of slave populations from distant regions. This demographic engineering created societies where Roman cultural dominance became self-reproducing as indigenous populations gradually disappeared through combined effects of warfare, enslavement, and cultural assimilation. The Romans' efficiency in processing human beings extended, preventing resistance even within the captive population itself. Ancient sources describe how Roman forces deliberately separated women who might support each other's sisters, divided mothers, separated from daughters, women from the same communities, distributed to different buyers across vast distances. This systematic fragmentation of social bonds served to prevent the formation of supportive networks that might enable resistance or escape, ensuring that even large numbers of captives remained psychologically isolated despite physical proximity to others. Roman accounting practices reveal the scale and systematic nature of human trafficking during military campaigns. Surviving documents from provincial administrators record specific numbers of women captured, transported, and sold during particular campaigns, with totals that often reach thousands from individual battles. The specificity of these records, notations about ages, physical conditions, pregnancy status, even perceived temperament, demonstrates administrative attention that transformed human trafficking from ad hoc military practice to systematic state policy. The integration of captive women into Roman society occurred through multiple pathways, each designed to maximize different forms of exploitation. Attractive women might serve as household slaves or concubines. Their children were often raised as slaves themselves regardless of paternity. Those with specific skills could be trained for specialized roles, textile production, entertainment, or education, creating economic value that extended far beyond their initial market price. Women deemed unsuitable for these roles faced agricultural labor, mining, or other forms of productive work that generated ongoing profit for their owners, while literally working them to death. Roman literature and art provide disturbing insights into how thoroughly these practices permeated elite Roman culture. Poetry, drama, and historical accounts routinely feature captive women as plot devices. Their suffering transformed into entertainment for Roman audiences. The specific ways these narratives portray captive women, emphasizing their former status, their degradation, their ultimate acceptance of slavery, suggests cultural programming designed to normalize and justify Roman trafficking practices by presenting them as inevitable aspects of civilized life. The technological aspects of Roman human trafficking reveal a sophisticated understanding of how to maximize profit while minimizing resistance. Ancient sources describe specific techniques for transporting large numbers of captive women across vast distances while preventing escape. The use of neck chains that prevented running while allowing walking. The development of marching formations that maximize visibility while preventing communication. The systematic use of forced marches that exhausted captives while preserving their market value. These were not ad hoc responses to particular situations, but standardized practices taught to Roman military personnel. The psychological techniques employed by Roman forces extended beyond physical control to systematic psychological manipulation designed to break resistance. Captive women were often forced to witness the execution or torture of family members, creating psychological trauma that served to prevent future resistance. The specific timing of these demonstrations, often immediately before transport to slave markets, suggests calculated use of psychological shock to ensure compliance during the vulnerable period between capture and sale. Religious and cultural dimensions of Roman trafficking practices reveal how thoroughly conquest served to undermine indigenous belief systems. When Roman forces captured women who served as priestesses or religious leaders within their communities, they were not simply acquiring valuable slaves. They were systematically eliminating indigenous religious authority while demonstrating Rome's dominance over spiritual as well as temporal power. The public display of these women's degradation served to communicate that Roman authority extended even to the realm of the sacred. Archaeological evidence from Roman military camps reveals the infrastructure supporting systematic trafficking in captive women. Excavations consistently uncover specialized facilities separate holding areas for women, evidence of medical examination areas, spaces where captives' appearances could be modified to increase market value. The consistent presence of these features across different sites and time period suggests standardization of practices that transformed individual military campaigns into components of an empire-wide human trafficking system. The role of provincial administrators in maintaining Roman trafficking networks reveals how thoroughly these practices were integrated into Roman governance. Surviving documents show how local officials collaborated with military forces to identify valuable captives, maintain holding facilities, organize transport to major markets, and ensure that profits from human trafficking flowed appropriately to various Roman authorities. This administrative infrastructure transformed military conquest from simple warfare into systematic economic exploitation. Roman medical practices related to captive women revealed disturbing attention to maximizing market value while preventing resistance. Ancient sources describe how Roman forces employed physicians to examine captive women, identifying those suitable for different markets, while treating injuries that might reduce sale prices. Of specific medical interventions describe force feeding to improve appearance, treatment of injuries that might heal sufficiently to preserve value. Even primitive forms of cosmetic surgery demonstrate a systematic approach to human trafficking that extended to medical manipulation of captives' bodies. The international dimensions of Roman human trafficking reveal networks that extended far beyond individual conquests. Captive women from particular regions were often transported to distant markets where their exotic origins might increase their value, creating trade networks that connected Roman frontier warfare to urban markets thousands of miles away. These trafficking networks served not just economic functions, but cultural ones introducing populations of enslaved foreigners into Roman communities in ways that reinforce Roman cultural superiority while providing economic benefits to slave owners. Roman legal evolution regarding captive women demonstrates how thoroughly trafficking practices became institutionalized within Roman society. Over centuries, Roman law developed increasingly sophisticated frameworks for regulating the capture, transport, and sale of enemy women, creating legal categories and procedures that normalize human trafficking as a standard aspect of imperial administration. The specificity of these legal developments, different regulations for women of different ages, social classes, or ethnic origins, reveal systematic attention that transformed individual acts of wartime violence into institutionalized policy. The psychological profiles of Roman officials involved in human trafficking reveal how thoroughly these practices were normalized within Roman elite culture. Surviving correspondence and memoirs show how educated, cultured Roman administrators discussed the capture and sale of enemy women with the same clinical detachment they might apply to any other administrative matter, suggesting cultural conditioning that enabled systematic atrocities by presenting them as routine aspects of civilized governance. Archaeological evidence from Roman urban centers reveals how trafficking in captive women shaped the demographic structure of Roman society itself. Excavations consistently show populations that included substantial numbers of foreign-born women. Their presence is documented through burial practices, religious inscriptions, even DNA evidence that demonstrates how Roman conquest systematically transported women from defeated populations to serve Roman interests throughout the empire. The resistance patterns that emerge in response to Roman trafficking practices reveal both the systematic nature of Roman operations and the human cost of these policies. Archaeological evidence shows increased instances of female suicide during Roman conquest, while surviving accounts describe desperate attempts by families to hide women from Roman forces, even cases where communities chose mass death over submission to Roman trafficking. These responses suggest that conquered populations understood Rome's systematic approach to sexual and reproductive exploitation and viewed it as representing something even more terrifying than simple military defeat. Roman technological innovations in human trafficking continued evolving throughout the imperial period with improvements in transport methods, communication systems for coordinating markets, even financial instruments that allowed investors to profit from trafficking operations without direct participation in capture or transport. These innovations reveal how thoroughly Roman society had transformed human trafficking from simple warfare into a sophisticated economic system that generated profits for diverse segments of Roman society. The role of Roman women in supporting trafficking operations reveals how thoroughly these practices permeated Roman society. Elite Roman women often served as customers for captive women, who became household slaves. Surviving accounts describe how Roman matrons participated in selecting captives for particular roles and in training them for specialized functions. As female participation in trafficking networks demonstrates how Roman imperialism successfully co-opted women from the conquering society into participating in the exploitation of women from conquered populations. The long-term demographic consequences of Roman trafficking practices extended far beyond individual captives to reshape the genetic and cultural landscape of entire regions. Modern genetic studies consistently show evidence of Roman-era population movements that correspond to documented trafficking patterns. Linguistic and cultural evidence reveals how the systematic removal of indigenous women during Roman conquest created lasting changes in local populations that persist long after the empire itself collapsed. The systematic destruction of family structures through Roman trafficking practices served imperial objectives by preventing conquered populations from reproducing their social and cultural systems. When Roman forces removed wives and mothers from defeated communities, they were not simply acquiring slaves, they were systematically eliminating the reproductive and cultural foundations that might support future resistance. The specific targeting of women who held crucial social roles, healers, midwives, teachers of traditional knowledge, suggests deliberate cultural warfare that extended far beyond immediate military objectives. Roman memorial practices regarding trafficking in captive women reveal how thoroughly these atrocities were erased from official historical memory, while Roman monuments celebrated military victories and displayed conquered treasures. They rarely acknowledged the human cost of conquest, instead presenting Roman expansion as bringing civilization to barbarian peoples. A systematic erasure of trafficking practices from Official memory served to normalize Roman imperialism by hiding its most brutal aspects from future generations. The survival strategies developed by women who endured Roman trafficking reveal both the systematic nature of Roman practices and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit under conditions of systematic dehumanization. Ancient accounts describe women who maintained cultural practices despite prohibitions, who secretly taught their children about their origins, who created hidden networks of support that enabled survival under conditions designed to prevent exactly such solidarity. These survival strategies demonstrate that even Rome's systematic approach to human trafficking could not completely eliminate human capacity for resistance and cultural preservation. The mystery that haunts these histories involves understanding how Roman practices of systematic exploitation influenced later imperial systems and continue to shape modern approaches to warfare and conquest of specific techniques developed by Roman forces, systematic documentation of captives, specialized transport infrastructure, administrative systems for coordinating human trafficking, and cultural programming that normalized these practices established templates that were refined and replicated by subsequent imperial powers throughout history.